everyone, welcome to Faith Walk. So we're going to continue our study of Daniel. We are in chapter 3. So again, this is a pretty long chapter. So we're just going to walk through some of the pieces of this, put the puzzle together, and talk about the different things that are going on. So in chapter 3, this chapter is the only book in Daniel that doesn't actually mention Daniel. They believe that he remained at the king's court during this time. So we'll start out with the king's golden image is what my study Bible says. So we'll start out there with verse 1. So King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay, so this is the gold statue, and as it says, it is 6 by 60 cubits. So in the next section, what King Nebuchadnezzar does is he calls all the people. He calls everybody in. He includes judges, governors, counselors, chief treasurers, magistrates, administrators of the provinces, and he calls them all to come to the dedication of the statue that he had set up, and that was verse 2. So the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors and chief treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the administrators of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the statue that he had set up, and they stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So that was verse 3. So he's got everybody called in to worship, and he wants them to bow down to this gold statue. So he says in verse 4, "To you the command be given, you peoples, nations, and populations of all languages, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery," I hope I say that right, "bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire." Now, within this crowd is Daniel's 3 friends. So we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they are also in this crowd, okay? Daniel is not there. So this also noted that Nebuchadnezzar used the furnace, or furnace similar to this, on 2 Judean false prophets, Aham and Zedekiah. So I thought that was a little interesting tidbit there. Okay, so in the next section, starting with section 8, it is that the Chaldeans, now the Chaldeans are the magicians, the enchanters, the astrologers, sorcerers, soothsayers, wise men in the king's government. And they're basically experts in magic and interpreting dreams and things like that. So they come up to King Nebuchadnezzar and they accuse Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of not worshiping the statue. So what was their motive? Why would they do this, right? So their motive wasn't really devotion to the king, they believe. It was more of a hatred for the Jewish people is why he, they went to him and said, hey, they're not worshiping, they're not doing what you asked, they're just disrespecting you. So in verse 13, says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar began speaking and said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden statue that I have set up?' It says, 'Now if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, etc., all kinds of musical instruments, to fall down and worship the statue.'" So he gives them another chance to worship the statue. But it doesn't matter because they're not going to do it, right? And so when we look at Nebuchadnezzar, it says he's in rage and anger. So I think that this is due to, number one, his pride. He was a very prideful person, which is why God does humble him later. And also embarrassment, I think. He's embarrassed, right? These people are not worshiping the way he asked. They've disobeyed him, right? So he gives them a second chance, and they still refuse. So what they say is, if you go into verse 15, more towards the end of verse 15, right before 16. So it says, and this is King Nebuchadnezzar talking, "What God is there who can rescue you from my hands?" So in verse 16, it says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, 'Nebuchadnezzar, we are not in need of an answer to give you concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we were not going to serve your gods, nor worship the golden statue that you have set up.'" So basically, Nebuchadnezzar is saying that only their God can answer this question. So what God is there who can rescue you from my hand? I don't know. We're going to find out. So when they respond, they say that they are not going to worship the statue, even if that means that they will die in the furnace. So what does this say about them? Their faith in God did not entirely rely on belief in a miracle. So they weren't relying on God to save them and weren't relying on a miracle, but instead they were relying on a sovereign God who they trusted. So after this, we are in verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar is filled with wrath, and his facial expression was changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. So he orders for the 3 men to be tied up and thrown into the furnace. Now, the furnace is so hot at this point that the men that Nebuchadnezzar assigns to take the 3 men to the furnace, they are actually killed by the furnace. That is how hot this furnace is. And that just shows you just the heat and just how bad it was. And to see what happens next is truly God, right? So this furnace, it said, was built on a hill with openings on the top and the sides. So when they were thrown in there, the king could still see what was going on inside of the furnace. So in verse 25, he says, he responded, "Look, I see 4 men untied and walking about in the middle of the fire unharmed. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So he basically sees Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but he sees a 4th person. And he says that it's like the son of the gods. Now that may have been an angel or even a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. So then he says to them, come out, come out. He calls them out. And all of the people that were gathered around saw that they were not harmed. Not even their clothes, it says. So it says, no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had even the smell of the fire touched them. Not even the smell. That's absolutely amazing. It's just amazing. So in the next section, which is 28 through 30, which is the last section, it says this: Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants who put their trust in him. violating the king's command, and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or population of any language that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses made a rubbish heap. Because there is no other God who is able to save in this way. Then the king made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prosperous in the province of Babylon. So in this section, Nebuchadnezzar does say that God is greater than other gods, right? So he does say that. However, he does not admit that God is the only God. So he still continues to worship other gods. He just says that God, the true God, is greater. So I know a lot of people, know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace. But this really does show that God is a true God. He is sovereign in all things. All things are to his will. And he saved them in front of everyone, all the nations, everyone Nebuchadnezzar called. Everyone was there and saw that they were saved by the one true God. This is chapter 3. So chapter 4 is, I just love Daniel, so it's all great. Chapter 4, though, is about the same size as chapter 3, so we'll kind of walk through that quickly. Again, also, do your own studies, of course. If you have any comments, let me know. I usually look at my study Bible, do a little bit of Blue Letter Bible. I'm also studying in Bible Study Fellowship. We're studying the Old Testament, and right now we're in Daniel. So we're not doing all of Daniel, we're just doing pieces, but that helps to understand what's going on. But please, do your own, and if you see anything that I didn't, I would love to hear about it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. This is my new channel, so it's growing very slowly, but I love that you guys are coming and watching and studying with me.